Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending, those of you here and everyone online. It's nice to talk to you. Great. So maybe just a little bit about this project, and I'm not sure, some of you may have been to SAPEX, and you may have sort of accidentally wandered into the hall where I was doing the presentation. But so this is, I think, it's a pretty comprehensive kind of end-to-end supply chain project. Certainly, in terms of our business, it's one of the most ambitious we've ever undertaken. And the thing really about toilet paper is it's pretty cheap, and it's a low-cost product. It's quite voluminous. You're kind of shipping air. So when you're running the supply chain, you really have to find ways to make it as cost-effective as possible, because it can't afford a platinum ride. And I think that was sort of one of the big things that we spoke about at the beginning of the project, is that, they're the biggest seller of single-ply toilet paper in the country. They sell about 7 million rolls of it a month. And I think what's unique and why Twinsaver became a market leader in single-ply toilet paper is they wrap each toilet roll in this kind of wax paper. And if people do buy or use single rolls of toilet paper, it's protected and it doesn't get sandy or whatever. And so that was an innovation that wasn't there some years ago. And since they put that in, they became the market leader. It's quite interesting. So just by way of comparison, a pallet of Twinsaver single-ply toilet paper costs less than a quarter of the average pallet value of, say, Tiger Brand. So when you're trying to maintain a competitive cost percentage of sales, you can try and think in that context what you've got to do to the supply chain costs to get it at that level. So just quick introduction. So they're the market leader, Twinsaver, a national manufacturer and marketer of branded tissue products. They have a couple of mills, so converting mills in Cape Town and Klipprivier as well. And there they basically take the wadding or the recycled fiber and they turn it, the pulp or recycled fiber, and they turn it into wadding. And that's essentially just like giant rolls of toilet paper. It looks like an enormous roll of loo paper. Weighs, what does it weigh?
2.5 tons.
2.5 tons of this enormous, like for a giant. And then they take that into the factories and they convert it into products. That's the converting plants. And then, sell and distribute it to a couple of thousand customers around the country. A bit about us, Inhance. We design, implement, and run supply chain technology solutions, and we also offer 4PL services, which we'll talk about in a minute. But essentially, we are the 4PL operator for Twinsaver in this context. We have about 150 staff and over 100 customers in a number of different countries. I'm just going to touch briefly on some concepts, and forgive me, I think a lot of you are probably quite familiar with them, so I'm going to go quite quickly through this. But just to contextualize the kind of work we're doing. So, what are the different types of logistics management? 1PL is when you do it yourself. So for a long time, and still, I think a lot of SAB supply chain, they run themselves, so they're largely a 1PL. 2PL is typically when you subcontract parties to either do transport or warehousing. So it's typically discrete operational outsourcing. And it has some limitations in terms of not having cross-functional visibility. Then 3PL is when you have multiple functions outsourced to a single vendor. They typically run side by side, so the one feeds the other. You start getting some cross-functional efficiencies, or you would expect to. And then a 4PL is when you're running the logistics operation on behalf of a client, and you might be subcontracting a number of different 3PLs in the process. And then you're basically using technology, people, and process to optimize the whole value chain. And just to show how clever we are, we also know about the 5PL. In fact, there is actually 6PL, which I haven't got my head around yet, so I can't explain that to you. But 5PL tends to be even more holistic. It's right up the value chain, and it's differentiated by using data analytics, artificial intelligence, automation, and so on to really get integrated synchronous supply chain kind of working. And I think that's a kind of concept that everyone's been talking about for a very long time. But I think what's exciting about being in supply chain now is the technology absolutely does allow you to enable it now. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there now that can let you do this and do it with a lot less people than we used to. And then a control tower, we talk about that quite a bit, but that's ultimately the platform that sits on top of your various discrete supply chain operations is the one component. And then it's the people and process that you bring together to run your end-to-end supply chain. It's typically not a standalone application. It's like a suite of products that you kind of connect together. We talk a bit about transport control tower, which is specifically focused on the road. You can extend that into logistics control tower. So now you're adding warehousing and distribution. And again, all the discrete applications reporting into the single platform. And the context of this presentation, we talk about a supply chain control tower. So here we basically brought together all the functions within the business, from warehousing, yard management, transport planning, etc., but also supply chain planning, demand, inventory, and replenishment, all into a single unified supply chain control tower. So that's really the concept. I'll tell you more a bit about what we did now. I think we've kind of been through the network. It's over 1,000 suppliers. At this time, before we started, there were over 40 logistics providers, 600 owned staff and 130 outsourced, and over 3,000 active customers. And to begin with, what we found was it was a fairly unaligned and kind of higgledy-piggledy structure. I don't think they'd mind me saying that because it's not anymore. So it was you had the CEO with the finance, manufacturing elements reporting to him. Then you had a supply chain director, logistics manager, and so on. But then you had components, not sort of parts of the supply chain at Twinsaver was outsourced, and other parts were still insourced. So it was a bit disjointed. And what we also saw, certainly when we started the project, is you had quite unaligned objectives. So the shareholders' ethos had invested some time ago. They weren't necessarily getting all the returns they were hoping for. So there was a lot of shareholder pressure, limited investment. Suppliers, logistics providers, and other suppliers had their own agenda and the things they wanted to achieve. Twinsaver themselves, and specifically in the areas of sales, manufacturing, logistics, HR, and finance, all each with their own specific discrete measures, not always too concerned about how the other areas are performing, was concerned as they should be. And then, of course, customers who want their value, retailers trying to beat them down for their pound of fresh. There are no retailers here, are there? No. Okay. Making sure the retailers are giving value to their consumers, let's put it that way. And then, of course, the consumer, they want the product on time, on shelf at a good price. So a lot of different actors in the play that we had to try and please. We started this project the back end of F21, and the intention was through F22 to implement the supply chain solution and start realizing really good benefit from F23, which would be the 1st of October 2022. So we made actually quite a lot of commitments as Inhance. We put the implementation on our balance sheet, and we basically took risk. They could just give us notice if they didn't like what we were doing. And in that year that we were implementing, Russia invaded Ukraine. The fuel price went berserk. There's hyperinflation. I'm sure everyone in this room had some fantastic experiences of 2022. And so our objectives just suddenly seemed so much further away. And Twinsaver themselves had some business challenges. I've mentioned it's a low-value, high-volume product. They had manufacturing reliability issues, imbalances in the network and demand and supply, partly because of the manufacturing problems. So couldn't make the toilet paper where they should. High raw material costs. In fact, pulp prices were at record highs. and the top line price increase to trade was less than 5%. So it's like serious margin compression. And the business was in a very difficult situation in that year. And we were obviously a bit worried about what we had bitten off. And their logistics costs as a percentage of sales were actually tracking to 12.8%, when at 11.5%, we thought we could get them to 10%. So the goal of the project, essentially, with that context, the intention was to outsource logistics, implement sales and operations planning, and then deploy an end-to-end logistics system and platform. Twinsaver didn't have the capacity or capital to invest in building something like this. That's why they came to us to run it as a service, basically. And the goal of the project was to get logistics costs as a percentage of sales down to 10.5% and improve overall business profitability. So we essentially plan to take over the whole supply chain, inbound transport, warehousing, primary transport, inventory management, last mile distribution, and full recon and payment. So the order management, we also took over the call center, and that's been subcontracted to Smolland. So essentially, they gave us the whole lot, right about a 400 million rand supply chain to run and to pay the suppliers. We were actually able to move a lot of the payment terms from 30 to 60 days as well. We had some supply chain finance products that helped enable that as well. And the new structure was way simpler. So they only have 4 supply chain heads now, supply chain executive, and 4 in the supply chain planning team, the balance of which sits under our management. And then from a technology point of view, they didn't have yard management, didn't have call center software, they didn't have transport planning, WMS, and so on. So we had to implement a lot of that from scratch, and that involved a lot of different systems. 6 new systems were deployed in that 12 months, and we had to integrate a further 7. So it was quite an undertaking in terms of the number of new systems we put in. So because of the scope and level of change required, it was pretty complex, quite ambitious deployment plan. We wanted to put in supply chain planning, control tower, WMS, TMS, yard mobility, call center management, and a CHEP management solution all in 12 months, and not mess up the business while we were dealing with hyperinflation and a business that was in a lot of trouble. So the turnaround strategy needed quick results. They needed to start getting some profitability back. And they started with very little skills in place. So we had to bring a lot of that. As I mentioned, no capital for investments. So we want all this stuff, but we don't want to pay for it. So can you put it in and just run it as a service and take a chance on us? And that was the project life path. So supply chain planning, build, test, deploy. After they put in the supply chain planning solution, you'd have to have these weekly huddles where they basically didn't follow the plan because production wasn't reliable enough. It was a good plan, they just couldn't execute on the plan. So had to look at how we working with that process and improving on it, and then looking at the manufacturing reliability as well. And then we put in the supply chain control tower first. That I think is get eyes on. I think that's really what we learned is get visibility no matter how you do it. And it's the Hawthorne effect. Once you measure it and you start managing it, it significantly improves. And you have context and you understand where best to focus your energy. So that's kind of become a fairly standard approach for ours. We always put in the supply chain control tower first. Then we put in the yard management solution as well as call center outsourcing. That sort of came in first. Then transport management system. So that's line haul bulk planning. There was the main emphasis, balancing the primary network. And then warehouse management systems as well. So DP World had WMS in the KZN shared facility, but we put our warehouse management system in Pretoria and Cape Town, and the DP World team operate off our WMS. So that was the systems, and then at the same time, we had to go through a whole change process with the staff. So they had to be informed, advised, as consultation. 197 process was followed, and through that process, there were no retrenchments. They all moved either onto our book or DP World's book, and they had to be trained and a lot of parallel runs, etc., to bring the skills up to where we needed them as well, in parallel with the deployment of the systems. Okay, I'm going to touch a bit on some of the parts we deployed. So the one component was the supply chain planning, essentially using a linear program methodology to do demand planning, supply chain and inventory planning, and looking at planning for profit. So you kind of merge the sourcing and inventory planning methodology with which are your most profitable SKUs, and how do you optimize your product mix through that solve. So it runs over 40,000 permutations in each planning session to get the most profitable outcome. And once we understood where we wanted to source from, we could get the manufacturing liability better. It really unlocked a lot of value. Control Tower essentially is a live operational tool. If time allows and you want to hang around a bit, I can show you that live control tower and show you some of the capability there. But basically, it's not just kind of a BI tool. It has your flight boards, alerts, etc. But it also has alerting, workflow management. So there's embedded workflow management. There's autonomous process, so it can do auto approval. I'll show you a bit of that as well. And tactical and strategic planning on the fly. So we've used linear regression to do cost forecasting based on volume, and we can also do capacity forecasting as well. And then it gives you kind of that near-time, real-time platform that allows you to manage the operations. This, I think, was probably the most important unlock. I have a weekly meeting every Monday. It's sort of daily stand-ups, and I don't think you've ever missed a Monday meeting, or almost never.
No, I'm not going to leave now and then.
Now and then. But the point is the process runs. There's discipline around the process. It's not just, so Corné's on leave, now we're not going to have it. So that discipline is important. No PowerPoints. There's no, except for this one. But in the weekly meetings, we don't have PowerPoints. They just run off the control tower, and the measures are all run there. And even the actions can be run on the workflow. So some of the components, the sales tracking, obviously we bring in the sales actuals and the forecast, detailed cost forecasting, so cost reporting and forecasting. As I mentioned, we have a linear regression model that basically creates a cost function for each GL line based on its relationship with volume. Flight boards, so if you go to an airport and you look up there and you can see what time is your flight leaving, is it on time, is it delayed, is it boarding? So we have logistics flight boards that tell you if it's ordered, picked, dispatched, or delivered. And those can be up in the warehouses, and it's up in the central control room as well. Also measure things like route compliance. The event and alerting workflow is also we embedded something called Process Street. So you have, within Power BI, you have alerting, and then you can basically do exception management through something called Process Street. And the way it works is, for example, on this particular morning in the middle of May, it was a morning plan, and somebody released a load at 70% capacity utilization. And the minimum it has to be is 85. So it kicks off a workflow. Marianne will get a workflow, and she needs to then see, is she going to then make a request for approval? So she has to follow an approval process to release a load that's below the target utilization, or are they going to replan? Most people don't like getting approval, so they just replanned, and that load ended up on that very same day at 98%. So the process in the system looks after itself. You don't really need interventions. I am copied though on those alerts, so they do tend to jump on them quite quickly. We also put in something for finite cost management using workflow. So whenever you're dealing with 3PLs, or if you are a 3PL provider yourself, so a lot of the anxiety is around month end and what can you reasonably charge for and what was approved, or did I get an email or whatever. So again, we put in this workflow, and basically what it enables is anyone who's providing a service can go onto the platform. If there's any exception-based cost, they just load it here. It's pushed into our environment, it escalates it through the approval workflow. Come month end, there is no discussion, there's no debate about anything. We run the process and the billing happens. So it really has facilitated better cost control, but also fairness to the providers, the logistics providers, in terms of being able to, not have to fight for every cent that they've legitimately incurred. Also brought in call center management software. So basically we plugged into Smollen's call center solution, and we're able to see, a lot of detail around service level, abandoned calls. We can then break that down further into complaints. You can click on any of these. I'll show you later if you're around. But so you can click on any of the problems. It'll tell you where it's assigned to, what product types have had those issues. I can tell you people who use one ply don't complain. There's a lot more people buying one ply toilet paper. Look how few complaints there. With two ply, those people are fussy, so they complain. But yeah. We also bring in a live weather forecast. So we actually have quite a few clients that are sensitive to weather. We have a bottler that says the sun's their best salesman, but it could in fact impact your loading, it could impact your operations, and so we bring in the weather forecast, and then the teams can plan accordingly. If there's going to be some heavy showers late afternoon and more bulk loading that gets impacted by the rain, so then maybe you do your bulk loading in the morning. CHEP, I hope there's no CHEP people on the call, but so they were having challenges with managing CHEP costs, and we have an interface to the CHEP environment, and we can drill down into, we basically created this thing where it gives you, where we calculate how many CHEP pallets should be in the network based on stock, inventory, issues, etc. And then we send an alert if your actual CHEP count is higher than your target. And then you can drill down there, you can see exactly who's got your pallets, what the docket numbers are, and what the docket status is in terms of tracking and retrieval of the pallets. And from at its worst to sort of the aggregate, we reduce CHEP costs by about 40%. Just can be quite a big number depending on what you spend on CHEP every year. Another part was transport planning. So line haul network planning. That's not something that there's a lot of companies that sort of do it, but have a placeholder, or they'll confirm loads outbound, inbound, or they'll plan lanes into KZN or whatever. But I think what we try to bring that was a bit different is, Twinsaver have, say, 60 loads a day. In our network, we have over 6,000. So we would look to try and balance the network, look for opportunities to do that. Also working with DP World, they had complementary flows and could help us balance the network as well. So because we're able to do that, we could actually add fleet to the vehicle and use them on a fixed variable basis, and ultimately reduce our cost per kilometre by 12%. We reduced empty legs by over 80%. And the way we did that was, if we had a fixed, on our fixed variable fleet, basically there would be a fixed cost credit if we were able to sell the lane to another supplier, so it would go back to Twinsaver. We also improved loading utilization a bit, so 4%. Again, you take 4% of your loads out a year, it does add up. And then better network sourcing. So the planning tool really helped us as well to source from the right place. That's a little bit on the load balancing tool. So it takes all the loads in the network. You see is quite a lot of them, just for 1 month. Then we'll see the overs and unders, so the surpluses and the flows. And then it actually looks for backhauls. So it matches all the lanes. It thinks if you're going in and out of an area you can set it to a 1 day, 2 day, or 3 day spread, and then it'll link the backlaws. And then we can also benchmark average trip costs between suppliers and so on. So, oopsie. Oh, that didn't go so well. That was on here. So that's the load balancing, and then your typical kind of ability to plan routes, track routes. We put in a workflow device that we could track progress through routes. We've seen the flight boards, so on. You can drill down to fairly low level and see route compliance, route adherence by driver, by depot, delivery performance by customer. This documentation is uploaded into the portal, and we use now OCR, which I'll show you in a minute. Basically, it does auto approval of the PODs, and Nadine can keep me honest if I need some help there. Customer service, I think I mentioned, and your various sort of KPIs. So the document validation, I'll sort of talk about a little bit. So about 4 years ago, we got an actuary in to assist us to try and do OCR. It was about 4 years ago. And we failed. We got a 40% strike rate on that client because the machine couldn't interpret the document properly. It couldn't fill in the bits. And so, it didn't work. And then last year, so back end of last year, we really went into it quite hard again. And it just shows how fast technology is advanced. So the computer vision now is way better than a person. I'm going to show you what I mean. So basically, you can do a sign on glass EPOD, and it'll go straight into the system. Then it's always clean. You can scan up a document. The provider can take a photograph and send it up, or so there's a number of different ways that the system can receive a document. And then what it does is it looks for a bunch of fields, which you can kind of pre-configure. So you can say, I must have a trip number, an order number, or this and that. And it basically looks on the document for something called that. If it has to match a transporter name, it's Imperial Pty Limited or Unitrans, whatever. It has to specifically match that transporter name, or it might fail the POD. So you tell it what to look for. Then you also set quality settings. You can basically say, this is kind of my quality threshold that I have to pass the POD. Sorry. So you have a quality threshold. Then it'll kind of go. We use AWS services, but it basically then analyzes the invoice, and it will pre-populate all the fields, and it might even find and identify and be able to accurately pre-populate it. But because of your quality settings, it still stops it. So you can find the document, you can retrieve it because you've got all the information you need, but it hasn't met your quality criteria. You want to kind of still get a better picture. So it'll throw that up to you if it says, look, I know everything about this, I've seen it all, but I think you might still want to get another one. Now take this example. It failed failed because of the transport. I just want to show you another one. So that's successful. It reads that pretty well. So this one, it failed. So I'm 50. I can't read this. Maybe it's because I'm old, but it's pretty terrible. Somebody took a photograph in the steering wheel, so it failed it, but it returned an accurate trip number and shipping note number from that document somehow. So you were able to then immediately trace back and get the better quality version of the POD. So I think that's where we've got to in document recognition, is we kind of can do better than humans. So you're not going to need many POD clerks in the future. We also deployed yard management. This is, we found this to be a key unlock in primary supply chain and secondary, is you really have to create velocity at your yards. You have to be able to turn trucks around pretty quickly. So we did put that in, and that does a lot of analytics, traces trucks through yards, etc., and creates velocity there. I'm taking too long. I'm going to go a bit quicker now to get to the results. We put in warehouse management system. Again, I mentioned there were 2 sites we needed it, and this WMS is cloud-based, and it could do all the requirements needed, including things like flow racking, pallet miles, and so on. And that, again, helped us to measure and manage at an individual level and check productivity at a user level and significantly improve productivity. From a training point of view, we used a learning management system platform. So created all these training videos. People could access them. When you're getting through that fast, so many systems, literally hundreds of employees, it's nice to be able to use some technology that enables that quickly, and avoids the requirement to repeatedly go out to sites and train people. So the outcomes of the project. Logistics costs as a percentage of sales improved by 20%. It actually came down from 12.8 to 10. It was better than our target. The absolute net saving after outsourcing technology. So after paying our costs, after paying all the outsource, typically an outsource vendor needs to make a margin. DP World would need to make a margin. They took over 2 of the warehouses. They still saved 37 million. And logistics cost per cube were down to 403 Rand and cost per pallet down to 564 Rand. I did say a while ago, if somebody could find a customer that's doing primary warehousing, line or transport, fine distribution, last mile distribution and warehousing, etc., for 564 Rand a pallet, I'll buy you a lunch anywhere you want to go. But we haven't seen that before. I think if you just add it all up and you think about what the discrete costs for a pallet are to get it to that level, I think it's pretty low. So we also improved manufacturing reliability, reduced inventory by 30%. We had improved customer service and supply reliability, and the profitability swung by over 250 million Rand. So a significant profit swing as well because of all of this. So the partnership worked. I think all the parties worked well together. It was pretty open and respectful, and we were able to achieve beyond what we thought we would. From an ESG point of view, obviously, less kilometers, less fuel, less CO2. Significantly reduced manufacturing waste actually as well because of reduced line stoppages as that manufacturing reliability improved through better planning, and obviously use less energy. That was in F23. So fast forward F24, how are we doing? There have been other challenges. Revenue is only tracking to a 2.2% increase this year because of market pressures. Real transport inflation at 5.3%, so we have risk of compression. Sales is a bit below budget. 2 of the smaller divisions were sold, so that contribution is lost. There were fairly significant power outages in Gauteng. Pre-load shedding was actually a localized power disruption. But despite that, I think we're doing pretty well. Remain on 10% cost percentage of sales. Saving will go up. Profitability for the company is going to improve by another 18%. And so I think that to us we're quite proud of as well. It's sort of a second year running that the results are there and fairly strong results. Let me end with learnings. I think firstly on the people side, give people hope. I mean, this was a business that had its challenges. They were on and off going to be sold by Ethos. There was some uncertainty, but we really found within our team and within the Twinsaver team a real positive approach. Quite passionate, and so that's key. Give people hope. Encourage risk sharing. I mean, we took some pretty big risks as well, but that I think keeps everyone, all the wood behind the same arrow. Engage frequently with all the role players. So we talk all the time. You can't communicate enough. Not if they're unnecessary meetings, obviously you don't want to, but that communication is important. And then collaboration is not easy. So be prepared for uncomfortable compromise. We used that word from the beginning. So if you have an agenda or you have a requirement, you're a supplier and that's the customer. If you're in manufacturing, the person's in marketing, don't go in the room expecting to win. Just go in the room expecting for the best possible outcome collectively. And you walk away going, I wish I could have got a bit more of that. But, if you feel like you've really just, got everything you want, something's probably not gone right in the meeting. So we spoke a lot about that's what compromise is. It's sometimes a bit uncomfortable, but you've got to get through it. Visibility I mentioned, but it's really important to get the lights on quickly. I think also innovate, test boundaries. So we continue to experiment. We're constantly trying new things, new ways of doing the activity-based costing, the computer vision on the POD automation was only the beginning of this year. So 2-3 years in, we still keep coming up with new ideas and trying new things. And I think that keeps it fresh, keeps it interesting. I think activity-based cost control is no longer limited to an oversight capacity, limited by oversight capacity. So people tend to want to contract to a cost percentage of sales or cost per case or a cost per something. They don't want to understand the granular detail as a consumer of the service because it's just too much work, So I think the way we set this up is it made it easy to have that visibility and easy to have the see-through, and it put the control back in the customer's hands, so that you don't have to do, can I say, activity-based costing with fat. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So I'm explaining myself well, but if you get to unit-based costing, the supplier is always going to put a lot of fat in. So this was key, I think, to be able to get that right. And then, sell your dedicated capacity in the open market. Find ways to get other products to ride on your trucks. And we also optimize the contracts to let costs follow volume. So we significantly lowered the fixed cost base, put as much as we could on variable. So if the volume fluctuates, the cost per cube stays the same. Okay, that's it. Any questions or comments about? Is that clear enough?
Yeah. Honest opinion is wow. For 12 months with another brainer stuff, sorry, just one impression. That's very impressive what you've done.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a copy of the slideshow.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
So question, to this point, there's quite a lot of initiatives that have come out of the project.
Yeah.
But my question is, from all these different initiatives, did the improvements come about? Because we were looking at the KPI results, we spoke a lot around making sure there was the right level of visibility around performance and so on.
Yeah.
Did this come about from that, or was there some kind of an assessment in terms of the state or the maturity of the supply chain and what needed to be done to go through some kind of a journey to some ideal state?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we did actually do, I didn't mention it, we did actually do a bit of a cost analysis, like a network analysis prior to this, and said we think this is what's possible. So we sort of defined the possibilities with the initial study. But I think the putting that measure in as quickly as we could, and even if it's fed by Excel, wherever it comes from, that was key. And you can see where the problem is. You